Government Relations for the International Association of Plumbing and Mechanical Officials, one of the members and founding members of this coalition, the High Performance Buildings Coalition. I would welcome you all to this year's Congressional briefing, Retrofitting for Resilience. The coalition was founded in 2007 as a network of professionals working in the built environment and provides support for the High Performance Buildings Congressional Caucus. Over the years, the coalition has expanded to represent 200 different organizations operating in the space. Before we get started, I would like to recognize our current executive committee. I know we have also a couple of past chairs present as well, so I'd like to mention them. We have General Morgan Hamilton, who is our immediate past chair. Ben Evans, who would not be with us this morning, who is our vice chair. Mark Valentini, our secretary. Lisa Berger, who is our treasurer, and also chair of High Performance Buildings Week. And we have Stephen Rossi, who is our policy priorities committee chair. John Bolin, who is our appropriations committee chair. And Christina Caney, who is our state and local issues chair. All of these people come from various organizations across the built environment to help with this coalition make sure that we are successful. I'd also like to recognize Gabe Mazer, who is a past chair, and Dave Hansen, who is a past chair, who are with us this morning. If I missed anybody, please let me know. These individuals, plus all the active members of the coalition, spend countless hours working together to represent the priorities of the coalition and the organizations that they represent, and we appreciate everything that all of them do. Now I'd like to recognize George Guska, President and CEO of the National Institute of Building Sciences, one of the members of the coalition, who will serve as moderator for our panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. Before we kick off the introduction from our esteemed panelists, I just wanted to, for those of you who are not familiar with the National Institute of Building Sciences, we were created by Act of Congress in 1974 to be the nation's authoritative source of findings and recommendations that improve the built environment for the American people. Our mission is to create a safer, more resilient, and technologically advanced infrastructure that serves American communities and strengthens our nation's future. Frankly, what we believe centrally is that innovation, building innovation, is the foundation of American innovation. If you think of American innovation as a tie that are saw oats, building innovation is for anything that helps increase and strengthen the foundation of innovation, like retrofitting, resilience. Then what that happens is it will cascade throughout the entire economy, and it will help build better outcomes for lives, livelihoods, and communities across the nation. Now let's start with our theme panel. If you could please introduce yourself and something about your organization. Starting at the far end with Christina Darrows, who's the legislative aide for Senator Adam Schiff.
I'm Christina Darrows. I work for Senator Adam Schiff. In a disaster insurance issue, so happy to be today.
Thank you. Aaron Davis. Lisa Washington, Executive Director and CEO of the Design Buildings Institute of America.
Good morning, I'm Lisa Washington. The Design Buildings Institute of America is a membership organization with about 20,000 members, and we define, teach, and promote best practices in design build project delivery, which constitutes about 50% of construction spending right now in design build, including new research, saves significant time, money, and to increase innovation and quality in the built environment. Glad I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Aaron Davis, Deputy Executive Director of Build America.
Aaron Davis, Bill Strong was founded about a decade and a half ago with a focus on pre-disaster mitigation and resilience retrofits backed by the insurance industry and working closely with resilient materials manufacturers.
Thank you. Aaron Levy, Vice President, Government Relations of the International Code Council.
Well, good morning, everybody. It is Subi and Shvisi out, so thank you for making the trip. I'm Aaron Levy, Vice President of Federal Issues at the International Code Council. We are proudly the nation's
Morning, everyone. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. American Society of Civil Engineers, we're about 100 years older than NIPS, believe it or not. And we've been involved with NIPS for its entire life. We go back to 1852. We're based out of Reston, Virginia. We've got 160,000 members. We're in 177 countries now. And we're the civil engineers, the folks who are designing, building, operating, maintaining a lot of our infrastructure. So we spend a lot of time as a technically based organization, technical conferences and publications, continuing education programs. We develop standards as well. We're closely with ICC. Many of those standards do get adopted in building codes. And so it's been a pleasure to be here and be part of the Consultative Council.
Thank you so much, Tom. ASC has been such a foundation for the nation and the built environment. My first question actually goes to you. If you could explain a bit about the Consultative Council ethics and why did the council focus on retrofitting for resilience this year?
Absolutely, yes. It's been a pleasure to be involved with the Consultative Council. If you look at this report, you'll see in the beginning, you can read a little bit about the goals of the council for meeting thought leaders, identifying challenges, finding solutions. For the Consultative, and you can also, by the way, see some of the members of the Consultative Council. If you go towards the back of this report, you can see a list of a variety of different, over 20 different associations. So where we represent 160,000 members, each of these associations in turn represent many thousands, we're in the millions of members now when we talk about the Consultative Council. So these are folks who are all involved in our built environment. We're working on things like innovation, as George talked about. So we've got people who are operators, builders, designers, and surveyors, architects, engineers, owners of our infrastructure. So we're convening and we prepare this report that goes to Congress with our recommendations on what we think is important for our built environment. So we've done reports on workforce, we've done reports on water, we've done reports on affordable housing, and you see this time we're going to hear more about this report, which is focusing on retrofitting for resilience. All of us, as we sat and talked about with our Consultative Council, thought this was an important topic for our country. I came in on Amtrak last night from Philadelphia. I have twice up there this week. Combined on Amtrak, I had 3 hours of delays. Last night I got in after midnight because we left an hour late from Philly, and then when we got to Baltimore, we had to wait to offload another train that couldn't move because the brakes were stuck to get down here. So, we're seeing asphalt buckling out west. We're seeing swing bridges, we're seeing drawbridges that have difficulty closing. That's just, sort of this week. And we recognize that there's a whole host of challenges that we're facing with extreme weather events. Now, it might be seismic, it might be flooding, it might be drought, it might be heat, it might be cold, it might be water, it might be flooding, ice, snow, you name it. We have challenges that we have to be prepared for. And all of us, as we talk about this at the Consultative Council, recognize this is an important issue. And when we don't focus on this issue, we end up paying a lot more dollars on the back end. If we're reactive and not proactive, it shuts down trades, and that can have a major impact on our economy. So we know that a lot of the infrastructure we rely on is lifelines. We need it for our quality of life and for life itself. And so we're very focused on this. And as we talked about this at the Consultative Council, we felt like this report was extremely important to educate Congress, but also, ultimately members of the public. ASC does also release a report card on America's infrastructure. So we did one this year. We do it every 4 years. And so this was, we actually shown some improvements in grade C, but 18 categories, 9 of those are still in the D range. We look at our solutions. We have 3 key solutions. One of those is focusing in on resilience. So this report from NIBS is trying to really pull together a lot of the thoughts from the different associations that comprise this Consultative Council and make sure that we then push that out so people understand the importance of our infrastructure.
Thank you so much, Tom. When we talk about retrofitting, like any other effort, it requires resources, limited resources. So it's important to understand the business case for retrofitting and why that business case realizes a return on investment. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure, thanks. I'm a former committee staffer for House T9. We worked to advance some measures, some provisions building stock, a lot of existing infrastructure stock, that can be retrofit, that are in high-risk areas. I think if you look at the success of programs like Fortified in both Alabama and Louisiana, you've seen dramatic reductions in insurance premiums. You've seen incredible oversubscription and interest amongst the population in taking advantage of these programs. Putting a fortified roof on a home in Louisiana or Alabama pays off in under 5 years when it comes to reduced insurance premium costs annually. That's something that these homeowners, these property managers recognize the importance of, right? That is a loss that they are not experiencing when disaster strikes. And that's our first order issue, right? You start looking at second order magnitude issues from business interruption. It doesn't happen, workforce interruption, it doesn't happen. These are all investments that make a ton of sense from a business perspective. Additionally, looking out west, where there's a lot of wildfire risk and there's increasing construction in the wildland urban interface to address housing challenges there. There was a study in 2002 that was conducted by the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety and Headwaters Economics, finding that mitigation against wildfire, retrofits against wildfire risk costs $3,000 on average, right? You look at maybe not the Palisades, but maybe a community like Altadena, if you made those investments and done some significant brush clearing and forest maintenance, you could have seen that it's dramatically reduced loss in those communities. And in the case of Altadena, even in the case of the Palisades, those are all people that are working who have been displaced. Looking at the city of Los Angeles, there's a lot of wealth there, but there are the people in Altadena, the people in Pasadena are the people that make the industry work, and they have had to move dozens, if not further miles away from their former homes and their places of business, which has those secondary impacts on the local economy. And finally, the other point I share is a 2024 IDHS study focused on Section 8 housing along the Atlantic and Gulf coasts that found that investing in fortified roofs of those federally supported housing properties could produce a loss reduction of up to 50%, right? From a federal government perspective, that's money that doesn't have to be spent in a disaster supplemental, that doesn't have to be fought over here in Congress, and that limits those interruptions on the residents of those properties. So I think from a business perspective, there is sort of that bipartisan recognition that resilience retrofit investment makes a ton of sense. And I think we'll hear about it later from Senator Schiff. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I think it's kind of still amazing to me that 51 years ago when Congress created it, there was no such thing as a national building code. National model building code was something that was one of the first missions that was given to NICS. And it was part of bridging research, policy, practice. And I can't imagine a world now without building codes because of the sheer improvement to the safety of lives and communities. And I'd like to ask Aaron, what role do you see updated building codes have in the way that it can improve resilience?
Thank you. I'm going to start with a personal thing that ties together because the timing is fortuitous. So today is June 26th, which means 4 years ago today, I'm sitting in my house in Washington, D.C. Look at my phone, it's the FEMA Operations Center. And as Aaron knows, the FEMA Operations Center is all of you on Saturday, so probably not a good day to pick up the phone and just leave to the staff today. It's not an invite for coffee. Because 2 days before was the Surfside Building Collapse, which we just celebrated. I wouldn't say we celebrated the anniversary, but we recognized the anniversary 2 days ago. That was my first journey into the built environment from a disaster resilience perspective. And I don't think you can really, someone who's a grizzled veteran of emergency management, and you can heard it, you've seen it, and what a failure of the built environment on that level is truly like. Compounded by the human suffering that you see when you walk into an auditorium with the eyes of the families of people who are holding out hope. Even after all those years of FEMA, that inspired me to get into space. And what I can tell you is, building codes, they represent not only a highly cost-effective strategy to help protect communities from risks, but if you get into the data, anybody who's doing a long-term disaster recovery business will tell you the hardest thing to do in long-term disaster recovery, aside from housing, you have an entire pay for it's not housing, is reevaluating the economic base of the community. If you don't do that, the community doesn't come back. And the data shows that code changes, updating to the latest code, can reduce mortgage delinquency by 50% after hurricanes. That is a considerable amount. And what's difficult to see is in some states across this country, certain special interests are now lobbying against states, localities, municipalities, and local governments updating to the latest code, even the last two versions of the code. And from a disaster resilience perspective, code adoption, this is a cross-cutting risk reduction measure. And this is an opinion, this is fact. You're ensuring structural integrity. You're enhancing fire, electronic, and plumbing safety. You're lowering insurance costs, and you're reducing property damage. Now, I don't know who the world's leading expert on disaster resilience. It's not me, but I'm sure that anyone in that space would probably tell you anytime that you get a multifaceted effect from a single investment is good. It's good for you, good for your community, and good for your neighbors. And also good for the market. As Aaron knows better than I, and you guys have heard the news, we have insurance companies pulling out of markets across this country. And I don't see a federal solution for that coming down the pipe anytime soon. And if you're going to take an all-hazards approach to disaster resilience, using codes to do that is simple mathematical truth. This is the last thing I'll say. We are lucky in this country that we have a small d democratic process for code development that ICC does. Other countries, there's a top-down effect where you have a bureaucrat at a central government location telling everybody what they have to build. Here, the consensus-based code development process that ICC is known for provides a mechanism and a capability to keep our country safe, to keep firms profitable, and to keep communities resilient. And I think the last thing I'll say is about energy efficiency, because the last couple of months, with the change of administration, change of majorities in Congress, energy efficiency is not as in vogue as it was, let's say, on January 19th. That's not a partisan war. That's analysis. But if you look at this, you get out of the trees, you go to the forest, and you look at this from a national security issue. Whoever is going to win the AI race is basically going to win supremacy and safety for their citizens across the world. And if you're going to win the AI race, you're going to need an insane amount of energy in order to do that, and power those servers that are necessary. And I think the gains that we see in modern energy codes can save building owners money, while protecting occupants from extreme heat or cold near power outage. I don't know about you all, I would not want to be in a home today that was built to a lower code than our most up-to-date energy codes, given the heat outside. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Lisa, DPIA as an organization that represents the entire spectrum of design and construction professionals who work collaboratively to build and rebuild across the country, across the world. Have you seen in your membership, through your experiences with owners and individuals, a continuing drive to adopt resilience measures, even as perhaps government incentives decrease or disappear?
Yes, we have, and you mentioned that the GA represents the entire spectrum, and self-certified, those in the room that the entire spectrum, meaning that GA members include those practitioners in the industry, architects, engineers, general and specialty contractors, specialty consultants, as well as the public and private owners. All of those people are involved in the design process. So it gives us this is mandated. We believe that we should not wait for disaster to strike to take off these things. We should not wait for a mandate and now we take off these things. We believe it is the smart, responsible, and enduring thing to do. Take off resiliency at the outset of the project. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we all were very moved by the wildfires that devastated Los Angeles earlier this year. And after we saw that, Senator Schiff and Senator Sheedy introduced the Firewall Act. Christina, could you please talk to us about how this came about and what we can do to help advance this vital piece of legislation?
Absolutely, happy to. So the Firewall Act really came out of, obviously, the devastating fires that are now in January, and particularly the Eaton Fire, which impacted Baltimore, is an area that I was in when I represented Schiff's district for quite a long time. And we decided that this had to kind of be priority number one for the senator in the Senate, and his first bill had to do with these fires and ensuring that people aren't in this position again and helping people to harden their homes so that they're a little more resilient to what natural disasters that happened now in January. And Senator Schiff and Senator Sheedy kind of found each other on the floor, and Senator Sheedy has made some incredible strides in terms of, obviously we were in this fire space as well, and they kind of discussed this measure and decided this is something they want to collaborate on. And that's really how this bill was born. And I think the end product is pretty remarkable. It's a 50% refundable tax credit for home burning against pretty much all major natural disasters, up to $25,000. So if this is not the most generous refundable tax credit proposed, it's certainly one of them. We wanted to make sure that those who don't have tax liability are still able to take advantage of this credit. And this would cover a number of burning measures to fires, to tornadoes, to floods. And we actually, there's an analysis from NIPS on the overall cost, because I think that's sticker shock is something that comes up quite a bit in Congress, and it actually showed that there would be net savings from a measure like this, just given how much less we have to spend on disaster recovery and response. So this makes financial sense, and it will help folks a lot as we're entering an area of increasingly severe and frequent natural disasters. So in terms of getting this moved, I think we really see some strong bipartisan support from folks on the Senate Finance Committee and in the House. We'd love to have a companion bill. Some folks on House Ways and Means championing that measure as well. That's something we're working on our side, but it would be very helpful as well to have that support and have the message spread as strongly as possible. So.
Thank you so much. I think what we're trying to highlight through this report, through all the work that the associations that took part in this report, the Consultative Council, the entire AC industry, is to highlight the fact that everyone benefits from mitigation and outright prevention of damage from wildfires, earthquakes, storm events, whether it's insurance companies who face claims, taxpayers and government agencies that deploy massive emergency payouts, property owners that benefit from less damage, and most importantly, families across the nation are safer. The comprehensive approach that's been outlined here and recommended in this report to retrofit buildings and infrastructure for resilience against the devastating impacts of disasters protects lives, livelihoods, and communities across America. We really thank you for your time and involvement in this issue that is paramount to keeping the built environment moving forward across communities throughout the nation. Now I'm going to open this up for questions.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for
Let me just say this, I think one of the things that ICC is pushed very hard are the National Residential Code, the National Building Code, is the integration of ADA and accessibility requirements. It shouldn't be an afterthought. I think that's from our perspective, it's part of the code solution that we try to provide communities and building officials so that they think holistically about the consequences that they want to build. Hopefully, as my colleague said, more resilient than we can. And that's a starting point on that. Secondly, a little bit outside the scope of this conversation, most federal assistance that you're going to get, you're getting into the nitty-gritty FEMA programming. This is more towards rebuilding public spaces than necessarily individual spaces. As FEMA is funding the rebuilding of schools, public facilities, and the like, there's going to be requirements that those are going to be compliant with. Number three, and I'm going to American Aerospace all the insurance industry, I would very much encourage you to engage with them to make sure that as there's still policies and other requirements for homeowners, that the rebate and payout and everything is going to allow you to rebuild for the person who's not covering this.
Yeah, on the accessibility upgrades, there already exists a federal tax credit for disability access retrofit that I think could be successfully leveraged with those by Senator Schiff and Senator Sheedy. I don't know of similar credit for residential retrofits. So I think that would be something we're talking to policymakers about. But yeah, we fairly useful as well. ADA accessibility across the board, universal design, a lot of the architecture, engineering, construction communities moving towards.
Just have one little thing. You talk about the code development process, about the small neatness of the code development process. You could come to one of our code hearings. We can't pay for you to come, but you can come to one of our code hearings. And this is the beauty of this process, which is one of the reasons we're taking steps to protect it in this Congress and beyond, is Jane Q. Citizen, where we're reading this every 3 years in the census-based code process. If you've had an experience where the residential code where you live did not include people like your family, you should come up to our code hearings and make that case to the deciders who are going to build that new consensus code. I think you will, and I can see your eyes. So, thank you.
And
Yeah, I'll just reinforce, in addition to the tax credits and the Americans with Disabilities Act, and, at the ASCD, we have a committee called Members of Society Advancing Inclusive Culture, it's called Mosaic. The woman who was the chair who started that when it was evolved into its current form is in a wheelchair and has accessibility issues. She's been a tremendous advocate for that. And if for that Pearson, then you probably know her. She's a wonderful civil engineer, and she's been at media as well. So this also goes back to the code of ethics for ASCD about treating, and in fact also in our strategic plan where we talk about sustainable infrastructure for everyone. And so it's just a basic, sort of a moral, ethical tenet that you're going to make sure that you're serving all people, and that's the infrastructure that we're developing. So we open up all of our meetings with safety minutes and accessibility, not only so we talk about accessibility, because those are the issues for us. So I appreciate it.
And thank you very much for the question. I think it's amazing to me, right? We don't often talk as a society about the impact that engineers and building officials and construction professionals have. But whether you're doing advancing, basic research at this laboratory, or you're designing for more adaptable and inclusive spaces, where you're making sure that what's built is structurally sound. There are myriad of Americans that their lives are saved without them even knowing. Their lives are enriched and empowered because of those environments. Please.
Thank you guys all for being here. My name is Stephanie, and I
So we were asked to create a report about a roadmap to incentivize resilience. And as part of that roadmap, the mortgage, the financial community in general, and the insurance industry was very, very interested in how they could be part of this. Because this ecosystem is one where you can create a virtuous cycle. Let me open up the next.
Yeah, this is a key issue. We actually held in the fall a finance summit, so we had all the bond issuers and ratings agencies and civil engineers coming together. And so we talked about a lot of the issues we're talking about now, but the finance community was very in tune with this because they're funding these on a long-term basis. So we talked about the need for life cycle considerations. And so if you're going to be looking at, and that's the changing the mentality from first use to life cycle, not just because you're driven on the entire life of the asset. The finance community is focused on that, especially when if you bring in private money or even the bond issue. So that is very much a focus for them. We're going to be holding another one this fall. So there's a real connection between the finance and civil community.
So I left ICC in March, so I don't know how Steve, my counterpart here, is on activities at ICC has been engaged in prior years, but I know that one of my former colleagues and one of Aaron's current colleagues was also very involved in meeting with the sort of federal housing agencies to be part of these discussions. So there's definitely top of mind, at least before this administration. I don't know if that's continuing, but I would assume that there has to be some consideration given all of the interwovenness of the financial industry.
Yeah, I was at before you guys know we have had positive engagements with new political leadership which is good. And I think what we're trying to position ourselves is a little suggestive that is codes are often framed as a strong man to affordability, right? We want to reframe that discussion. And I think what we're looking to do as we hit our energy code, as we get into our next code update cycle, is being able to work with homeowners and insurers and quite frankly, some of these regulators, trying to make sure that we're trying to balance that need for resilience that we've been talking about here. While at the same time, it's in everybody's interest for Americans to keep living and help to solve this housing crisis. Because no matter what side of the political line now, there's clearly a housing crisis in this country. And in order for there to be a sustainable housing market, you need a sustainable insurance market in order to do that. So I think our role here is to engage with the administration. They did actually more welcoming than I was pleasantly surprised. Really did a conversation about how ICC's defensive space code across our space can really part of the other discussion about what they're trying to solve the issue to increase the housing.
And one of the things I like, of course, is that as we talk about affordable housing and housing crisis, we need to recognize that the solutions are cycle-based, it's not punishment. Your first investment cost optimizes getting housing stock built. But to make housing stock affordable throughout its life cycle, which is what benefits Americans the most, then you have to look at housing stock in a way that increases resilience and increases the way that the housing stock can be better able to accommodate families throughout its life cycle. The more resilient it is, the less the cost in the later parts of the life cycle, which then drives
insurance companies get discounts for premiums. And I've been just been fairly successful with that. I'm curious what you all think. Is that the standard? Is there something else that's needed? And how do you try to take this, all the ideas that he's presented here, and make sure that the market recognizes them?
So I'll try and take this one. I think from a resilience star, I love the branding. I mean, but Energy Star is all, right? When we talk about federal standards are get tripped up. They get fouled up in bureaucracy. They get fouled up in appropriations language up there. You've got housing standards that HUD uses for publicly subsidized, for federally subsidized housing that are woefully out of date. They don't align with where modern multifamily standards, codes and standards are that ICC has developed. They don't take into consideration the same types of gases and material science and findings from disaster, especially fire. And look at the National Flood Insurance Programs and construction standards, those are 50 years out of date. So federal standard is not the way to go. I'm not saying that fortified is the end all be all, but it's something. Wildfire prepared, it's something. It's something that the insurance industry has put money into studying and evaluating, and has determined that these are meaningful changes. I think, I'm not wearing an ICC hat anymore, so fortified versus goats when it comes to roofing standard, there's not a lot of difference. But it's branded, and they've managed to partner with insurance commissioners in states that are rolling out these programs. And, as I mentioned earlier, these are incredibly popular programs that result in meaningful reductions in those operating costs for property owners and operators. So, is it perfect? No, but you could have 45 plus, you could have wildfire repair plus, I think private standards, privately developed standards that are multi-democratic and consensus-based are the best system that we have, and that we should lean into this.
Also, I think it's important to remember that standards are not static. Standards are not forever. Standards change as means, materials, methods, environment, conditions change. I think the measure of a successful standard is its ability to align incentives for all stakeholders, owners, and users. And I think it's especially important that standards are written in a way that it gives voice to what is important for those who don't get to sit at the table in standards.
I can just add standards, just so for everybody in the room. The AC is a standard developing organization, so one of the standards you see at the sort of front there is called AC7, minimum design levels. We have hundreds and hundreds of people who work on that standard. And that's a baseline. It gets adopted in your international building code and ultimately into state building codes. In many states are way behind on what they've adopted, as far as the current version of those codes. But we spend enormous amounts of time with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. It's over 600-700 people that work on that standard. Design professionals, everyone, these are infrastructure professionals. And so the knowledge and know-how that goes into that, there's an enormous amount of time that we spend. We try to learn from disasters. We send teams out to see how our infrastructure performs. We send them around the world. In many instances, we have a whole team of ASD members who are there who've been doing study on Surfside and trying to figure out exactly what happened there. How do we prevent that in the future? How do we change our building codes to learn from that? How do we respond when there's a flood or hurricane, tornado? We had a new tornado chapter to AC7 last time. The AC7 midstream, we had a supplement reference 500-year storms instead of 100-year storms because of the changes that we're seeing. We can't just rely on past data, we got to look towards the future. We spent the last 2 days with NOAA and NIST. Chris is here, and NIBS was there, JP doing the same thing, trying to figure out what are the future conditions we plan for. We're designing infrastructure now that's going to be for the next 100 years, and we're retrofitting infrastructure that's got to be able to last for many years and anticipate future conditions, not just looking backwards.
Okay. So very hard to follow my comments, so I'll be brief. I'm not going to put IDHS does for a number of reasons. First of all, the work that they do, the research work that they do, what they do in this area is excellent. Number two, their president is a great friend of mine and a mentor of mine, so I'm on camera and choose my words carefully. But joking aside, what I would tell you to do is obviously I do have that SEC hat on. And when I'm talking to a federal stakeholder or a JP citizen, one of the things that I try to impress upon them is their pathway to safety and resilience are the standards and codes that we develop, not because it's good for our business line, but because it's the full suite that you need to protect your whole community and environment. But the more important thing is how do we really lead that aside or call your attention to our international wildlife interface code around week. I think especially for you, if you look towards the western states, where the threat environment, the risk landscape is, well, wildlife on this a little bit, if you look across the country just in terms of square mileage, it's one of the things that I think keeps a lot of people out there. But ICC is very much for trying to do something about all inclusive code in that space. To meet those challenges. But again, I would say that IDHS is a leader in this space, and what do you think?
And the final thing is, I think it's important to recognize that standards don't exist in vacuum. They don't exist in isolation. They're part of a larger ecosystem. So, you take, for example, seismic safety. It's something that has been doing for 45 years, where just without waiting to do the next round of the interpretation standards or seismic building assessments to do, and will be handed over, and the ASC will look at it out certain parts of it and do ASC 7. And then that then filters through, make sure that it informs building code, informs everything. Why is it related to wildfire? Or fire in general? Because there's not a single event that doesn't end up including fire. And I think that's something to recognize. So standards can seem wonderful and say, I follow this one standard. Why am I not? What about that?
On behalf of the High Performance Buildings Coalition, I'd like to thank our panel for this presentation this morning. There's still some food left over there, so feel free to help yourself. I saw somebody open the door back here, so I think that might have been a clue.
We're good.
We're still good?
We're good.
Excellent.
We're good.
Excellent. All right. And feel free if you have questions, additional questions, I'm sure the panel members will be happy to answer. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you.